Welcome to Behind the Lines, coming to you from the socialist, Marxist lines of Washington State. It's a crazy liberal petri dish for the rest of the country, folks. Stay up to date with all the great news right here. Well, after the events of yesterday, could the double standard be any more clear? And I'm talking about this double standard in regards to protests or riots or whatever you want to call it. But I was listening to the news this morning, and of course Biden's out there, everybody's out there making statements now, but Biden today said that the protesters yesterday were rioters, insurrectionists, and domestic terrorists. And he also said if they'd been black, that the response would have been much stronger. And that's really good to come out and start throwing the race card issue around, right? He said that violence and property destruction cannot be tolerated. And yet it was tolerated for months and months in a lot of major cities around the country. Seattle, Portland, who had non-stop protests for months every night, where buildings were being damaged, cops were being assaulted. So I'm just wondering why was that okay? Is it because yesterday this occurred at the Royal Palace and our royalty's throne was desecrated? I mean, is that the reason why it's unacceptable now? The police have endured months of being physically assaulted and politically assaulted in these cities. They've been defunded. They've been called every kind of, racist and murderers and completely unsupported by most Democrats. And yet now all of a sudden, these Democrats seem to be pretty pro law enforcement, although I did hear them saying this morning in DC that the police didn't respond good enough, didn't fight back enough, whatever. But had those protesters yesterday been black and say that was a black woman that had been shot trying to go through a window, what would the response have been then? Well, what would people be saying today? Now, the police yesterday were outnumbered drastically. I don't know what the city expected them to do. You can only do so much. I watched the videos, as I'm sure a lot of you have. They tear gassed, they maced. The Democrats have made it clear, the country has made it clear over the last few months that you can't just pull your guns out and start shooting. So, well, what were they supposed to do? I mean, I don't know what the circumstance was, why the officer shot this lady in the chambers. It seems like it could be a misuse of force, but who knows, Was he in fear for his life with all those people outside pounding on the door, breaking the glass? Probably. I mean, and how many cops were right there? Maybe it was just him. He doesn't know if anybody has a weapon or what their intent is, once they get in there. But if it had been a black woman who had been shot coming through that window, I guarantee you this country would be burning down today. That would be completely unacceptable, no matter what, even if the woman had a gun. So this double standard, we have to figure this out. Like, why is it okay for our cities to burn and our businesses to be destroyed and all this stuff happening for months in these cities. Seattle had 6 square blocks taken over by a group of armed protesters for a few weeks or maybe a month, and 2 people were murdered there, people were raped there, people weren't allowed to conduct business who had businesses in that area, and the Democratic leaders did nothing. In fact, the Seattle mayor called it the summer of love. You have this event that happened yesterday. Yes, it was in the Capitol. The Capitol is the people's house, though, technically speaking, the people's house. Does that make it okay? No. It doesn't make it any more right than anything else that's happened for the last, 8 or 9 months in America that's left to go unchecked. But all of a sudden we're going to draw the line now because it was the Democrats that were affected, because it was their throne that was infiltrated. I mean, this has to stop. It has to be fair for everybody. And people's businesses and homes and right to walk through the city they live in safely is no less important than our little royalties throne in DC. The thing I notice about all these groups that are conducting these rallies and protests is there's way too much emotion involved and not enough thinking about what to do or how to solve the problem. It's just everything's run on emotion. If you watch these people yesterday screaming and frothing at the mouth and out of control, and it's the same thing at Antifa protests and all these things going on throughout the country. Just people running on emotion, not thinking, not trying to find ways to solve problems legitimately, and they're letting their emotions get the best of them. Going in and breaking stuff and stealing stuff it's not going to solve any problems. It's not going to further anyone's cause on any side of any argument. We have to do better. We got to come back to this point of either agreeing to disagree or being able to sit down and speak rationally to each other and figuring out how to move forward. This cannot be the way every future election or problem in a city is handled. This can't be the right response, to just have these pointless rallies, pointless protests where people just run around like wild animals and break everything and steal whatever they want. And I mean, it doesn't solve a thing. In fact, it's creating further division. As Americans, we have got to do better. And unfortunately, the Democrats are going to jump all over this, and they're already showing that this morning, that they're going to jump all over this to call out, what they're calling conservatives, to go after us, to start taking away, rights, and it's going to be interesting. I think yesterday was a big mistake. We've said all along for the last 8 or 9 months that we don't go out and riot like that and protest like that. And here yesterday, well, we proved it wrong. We let our emotions get the best of us. We need to be better than that. And the people saying today that wasn't patriots or conservatives or Trump supporters that ran in there and did that, you're wrong. And there may have been some Antifa in that crowd, but it definitely was not all Antifa. In fact, there was even a House Republican from West Virginia that live streamed himself going in with that group breaking into the Capitol. So I somehow doubt he's Antifa. It would be nice if yesterday's events maybe showed these Democratic leaders that law enforcement is needed and maybe back off on some of this defunding crap, but who knows? I don't know what's going to happen. Some states also had their governor's mansions or state capitals. There were protests at those, nothing like the one that occurred in D.C. I know in Washington yesterday, some protesters broke down the gate to the governor's mansion and got on his front yard and, were protesting there and then eventually got pushed back by police. But honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if, this new administration comes up with some kind of federal police force that will be used in cities. These cities have defunded their local police departments. They're still going to have law enforcement, and I just have this feeling down the road that is going to be filled by federal police. The cities are going to come to the conclusion that they are having crime run wild, and it's already starting in these big cities. It's been going on, but it's getting a lot worse now that some of these departments have been defunded and closed down some of their specialized units. And I just think that these states are going to petition the federal government and say they can't afford to fund their police departments. All the cities are broke at this point because of COVID. And so they're going to have something. And you're going to have a Democratic federal government that could very easily have a federalized police force, Department of Homeland Security, whatever, and they could be, deployed and patrol these cities where there's issues. I know maybe the National Guard will be used. They're being called in to some of these state capitals now for the upcoming sessions for the new year. I know Washington starts their session next Monday, and the governor's already activated the National Guard and said they'll be there to make sure, because there are planned protests that day, and to make sure there's no problems. So it's going to be an interesting year. Anyway, folks, it's something to think about. There's definitely a double standard with these politicians and how they protect themselves or how they feel about themselves, and then how they feel about all the rest of us on either side. It doesn't matter if you're Republican or Democrat. They don't care about any of us or our businesses or our homes or our lives. All they care about is their position, their wealth, and the tax money that they can squeeze out of us. And we're all in that same boat together, all of us as Americans. And we got to realize that. We got to come back together, agree to disagree like we used to be able to do. Anyway, folks, I hope you have a good day and be safe out there.